Welcome to the Pure Passion Podcast with Dr. David Kyle Foster. This podcast and our many other resources are made possible by our donors. Please support this ministry by going to our website, masteringlife.org.
Welcome to Pure Passion. I'm here once again with Dr. Richard Marks, a specialist in marriage and family therapy, sex addiction, all kinds of things related to wounding in childhood, especially father wounds and how that affects one's entire life. Last week, he began with describing what a father wound is and his story and what happened to him. I told a little bit about my father wound and what happened to me. So we're going to start today with Dr. Marks summarizing the best of what he taught last week, in case you missed it, so that we can go from there.
Well, we wrap up last week. We kind of defined it as basically a wounded man trying to parent when he doesn't know how, because he's never parented himself, and it's about neglect, father absence, those kind of things. It's a wounded man who's kind of not there intentionally, unintentionally. And I talked about my own journey of healing, how it impacted my life, how we create beliefs as children. They're really lies. Things like, I'm not good enough, I don't matter, I'm unlovable. Our brain creates those stories as children because of what's happening to us and around us, but we never question those. And that's the father wound, because we still believe we're not good enough to dad, or we matter to dad. And we never question those beliefs because they're unconscious to us, but they affect our future moment by moment by moment, day by day.
Now, I didn't ask this last week, but how does a father wound affect a woman differently? How does it do that?
Well, there's some research that actually talks about the difference between fatherlessness for boys and fatherlessness for girls, national research. But overall, girls take their father wound and become very insecure and will tend to withdraw. Boys have a tendency to become aggressive overall. We think gangs.
Now, I've noticed that sometimes a woman will go into promiscuity as a direct result of father wounding, especially if it was sexual abuse.
She can, very much so. Matter of fact, I pulled up some data, just what is the national data looking at fatherlessness. Listen to this. Kids from fatherless homes are 5 times more likely to commit suicide, 32 times more likely to run away, 20 times more likely to have behavioral disorders, 14 times more likely to commit rape, 9 times more likely to drop out of high school, 20 times more likely to have a prison. They're more likely to develop addictions of all forms, sexually being promiscuous. All of it is playing out the effects of absent fathers.
And then sometimes, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And then sometimes, instead of becoming sexually promiscuous, they'll become non-sexual. They don't want to approach that at all. And sometimes they'll go after an older man. It's kind of weird, the reactions that happen that seem contradictory.
It's different for different people. What we can say is we know the effects of a father, the lack of a father home has detrimental effects on children, and how they play out that wound, how they play out that wound in terms of behavioral problems. But we also know that fatherlessness is an epidemic problem in this country.
And in prisons, it's very high, right?
Very much so. I mean, look at gangs. Gangs are kids without dads. Yeah. And the gang, sociologically speaking, fulfills the role of a father in a young man's life. It just does it in a very unhealthy way.
Now, sometimes there are contributing circumstances that will make a father wound outcome worse or better. What are, like, your environment, your friends, your experiences with the opposite sex? What are some of those contributing factors that will make it more difficult or easier for somebody with a father wound?
Think about it. That old verse is a companion of fools. If you got a bunch of angry kids hanging around, you're going to become more angry and more aggressive. So I think you look at the father wound, and then if you're hanging around a lot of broken people, it'll feed that. Anger attracts anger, fear attracts fear, that kind of thing. So you can turn to addictions. So if you're dealing with a wound and you're hurting and there's someone smoking pot or doing cocaine, here, do this. And you take that first hit and you start to feel better. I want more of that.
Yeah.
So people turn to all forms of addictions, alcohol, drugs, sexual addictions, gambling, you see, all of those manifestations. You also begin to neglect the people in your life. You are neglected. So unconsciously, you neglect your kids. You're having kids out of wedlock or whatever, but you neglect your children. You neglect your wife. You neglect your girlfriend.
Yeah.
You see, because I don't want to bond and get attached, because I never bonded or attached. I'm afraid of it.
Well, let me tell you a story of one of the things that happened circumstantially in my life that made my father wound infinitely worse, as bad as it was, because I had tried to commit suicide 3 times over my life before I became a Christian. But during college, I went out to the pier in St. Petersburg to try to talk to God, try to find him, try to get some help from him. And it turned out I was in the place where male prostitutes stood to find customers to pick them up. And I didn't even know male prostitutes existed. So I was completely a lamb against the wolves in that point. And this guy walks, say?
A lot of naivety there.
Oh, yeah. I was a small town kid. I didn't know nothing from nothing.
Yeah.
So this man in this expensive car drives up and he waves me over. So I'm thinking, oh, this is a drug dealer place, So he asked me to get in the car. And so he was wealthy and I figured he's not going to do anything. So I got in the car just to see what it was all about. And he looks at me and he goes, "You're beautiful." And he had me just like that. From that point on, I was going to do whatever that man wanted me to do because he recognized some value in me.
Yes, words of approval, and you're longing for it. Words of acceptance. That's why I tell people, be careful when you're deeply alone, because the enemy will meet those needs for you as well. He'll meet your needs in ways that feel good in the moment, but the source of your pleasure becomes the source of your pain.
Yeah. And I almost knew from the start that he was just saying those things to get what he wanted from me.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember saying to myself, well, it's better than nothing. At least I'm hearing the words.
Yeah. So we say it this way in our world: bad love is still better than no love.
Mm-hmm.
Negative attention, still better than no attention.
So what are the things that cause a father to be absent, neglectful, and abusive? I mean, what causes him to do that?
The research shows that they themselves were abused. Mm-hmm. They themselves were neglected. They were abused physically, emotionally, sexually. They never bonded or attached. So there was deep neglect in their own life. I looked at my own dad. He was abused physically by his father and emotionally neglected. So my father couldn't give us what he wanted, so he developed another thing. He developed his own addictive personality. You see, food addictions and sexual addictions. Yeah. And so addictions are the things that will also feed into a man and that addiction lends himself to being father absent and a hurtful father, because addictions are very destructive. So basically abuse, absence, addictions, neglect. If you kind of give an umbrella, those 4 things lead a person to be disconnected from their kids and others.
So for the man out there who knows he's wounded and knows he's treating his wife and his kids wrong, he needs healing so he can stop doing all that and treat them right. What does the wounder do to get right, to get better?
The person who's the offender, if you will, the first thing they have to do is come to a self-awareness. Nothing changes if you're not self-aware. You can't have self-control if you're not aware of what you're doing. So the first piece is they got to become aware of that they are that way. And that's the tough part, because as well as I do, David, denial is a wonderful thing, right? But denial robs you of awareness. And it's only in humility can you admit, I've got some issues. It's like me, I had to come to the realization that I've got some baggage I got to deal with. fortunately, I was humble enough to admit those things, and then I cared enough to change them. So the first thing is you got to come to awareness that you have the problem, and then you have to face the reality that in that problem you've hurt people along the way, and that's tough to admit that you've hurt the people you really do love on some level. Mm-hmm. You see, now we don't know, so you have to go get help. Mm-hmm. You go get help. You seek out counselors or pastoral counselors or a mentor or a coach. For me, I went and got some mentors in my life. I went to seminars. Jack Frost's work on the father wound. Mm. I was talking to a Pentecostal preacher friend of mine in 2004. He said, "You got an orphan spirit." I go, "I got a what?" He goes, "You got an orphan spirit." I'm like, what in the world? Baptist, right? Don't know this kind of one. He goes, "I'm going to send you something." And he sent me the audio series of From Slavery to Sonship. David, I listened to that thing 8, 9, 10 times. Mm. I was like, I've never heard this, but it was me. It was me, which eventually led me to going to inner healing prayer. So Father was guiding me along and challenging my theology that I was raised with to show me it isn't about theology. It's about the scripture is a relational book. I need you to connect to me, Rick, the Father. And what I learned was he's a father I could never have. And when I embrace it, so these men have to get to that place too.
Well, for those who are listening, we have on our website, masteringlife.org, some Jack Frost videos. We have an entire conference that you can watch on our YouTube channel, as well as a 2-part interview that we did for our Pure Passion TV show. He's outstanding. Another person that's outstanding in this, in terms of the spiritual solutions, is Leif Hetland. He's a Norwegian, and he talks about the orphan spirit a lot. So those are 2 resources.
I was going to say, and one other person that really helped, Jack was probably the biggest one, because he's just so relational. But you look at Gordon Dalby's book on healing the masculine soul.
Gordon Dalby.
When he's the first one really coming out about the father wound and the brokenness of the male soul around that. And so I just referred that book to someone here locally today, Gordon's book.
Well, and John Eldridge has written good books on this. But the thing that really opened my eyes was, when one of the disciples asked Jesus, "Show us the Father, and that will be enough for us." And I just took that at face value. And I told this story on our last episode, but I began pursuing God as Father, and he began speaking truth where the lies had been. And just in hearing his voice, it brought healing. I knew immediately those were lies. I knew immediately that God felt just the opposite about me. And I had the moment where I had to choose. Am I going to believe the lies I've been believing that ruined my life? Or am I going to believe what God the Father says about me, the one who created me? And that was a big turnaround for me.
For me, that came through the inner healing prayer time.
Oh, tell us more about that.
All right. So now remember, I'm a Baptist going to inner healing prayer. So that's outside. And it was you were encouraging me to go. And so I'm like, I trust David. I'm going to go. So the first session was an hour long. And they, can we pray over you? Yes. Can we lay hands on you? Yes. Can we pray in tongues? Yes. Can we anoint you in oil? Yes. What do I do? Just sit there. Okay. So the first session, David, they prayed over things that I've never told anybody. So I'm like, how'd they know that? I went, God, this is real. Then they said, come back the next week. I came back the next week. And it was 30 minutes in my prayer session. I was thrown into a memory. 6 years old in Miami. I still remember it sitting right now. I had forgotten this. My father had an uncanny way of scaring us. He would get us terrified, be a costume or something. And then when we were out of control, afraid, we got beat for being afraid. So I am about 5 or 6 years old. He's in front of me in a costume in my house in Miami. And my stepmother's right here swatting at my head, telling me, shut up, quit being afraid. But they're actually scaring me. And I got triggered into that memory. And I started crying heavy. Well, the prayer counselors, like they know something's up. And I told them what I was seeing. And they said to me, find the Lord, he was there. And I said, no, he's not. They go, yes, he was. I go, no, he's not. I was looking at my house. I could see the sunken living room, the dining room right here. I'm looking behind my dad. He ain't nowhere. And the woman, prayer counselor, she says, Rick, he never leaves nor forsakes. You find him. He was there. And it was pretty like, you better do this. And so I'm crying and I'm looking in the memory. And David, I found him. I said, I see him. I'm going to tear up saying this because these are tears of joy. And they said, where is he? I said, he's above the memory. And they said, what's he doing? He was standing and his hands were on the arm of his chair. And they go, look at his face. What do you see? And I went, he's angry at my parents. I never thought that what they did mattered to him. Yeah. And the fact that he showed me he was angry when they were doing that to me meant that I mattered. It meant that it mattered to him.
Yeah.
It was like, in that point, all these beliefs I had unconsciously start to crumble. And they said to me, tearing up, buddy, hang on. They said to me, look in his eyes. What do you see for you? And I saw tears. He was mourning with me. Romans 12:15. And David was in that moment. Now, I didn't know it at the time. It was in that moment I was healed. I was healed. I didn't realize it. But months later, I was speaking somewhere and someone came up to me and goes, you have an interesting way of talking about God. I go, what do you mean? Go, you don't call him the Father or the Lord. You just call him Father. Like it's intimate. I didn't listen to myself. And I started listening to myself. I thought, oh my gosh, I do. Because he is my Father.
Yeah.
And that's when, as you had said to me a few months earlier, God's removing every father figure in my life. So I learned to make him my dad. That was the moment he did it. Yeah. That was the moment I let him fill that gap. And all those negative thoughts just went away because he showed me it mattered to me what happened to you. It mattered that they were doing that to you. And I was hurting for you.
This is so important. Let me tell you a story how I discovered what the Father was really like, as opposed to what I had thought he was like, which is really what you just said. I was committing a sin one night for the 10,000th time. And right in the middle, the Lord spoke to me. He's like, I could feel his presence in the room. And he said, David, if you'll turn to me now, I will love you and heal you and embrace you. And I thought, embrace me? I'm in the middle of a sin here. You know, my image of God was he goes outside the room when you're sinning. And if you're lucky, he comes back in. So I just ignored him. You know, I just pretended like that wasn't God at all and completed my sin. And the second that happened, he said the same thing again. David, if you'll turn to me right now, I will love you and forgive you and embrace you. And I remember something radically changed in my spirit that has never changed back. And I said, God, if that's what you're like, I want to follow you. And I went from following him because I was supposed to, it was my duty, after all, he saved me from awful things, to following him because I wanted to.
Yes.
And that just changed everything.
Yes. And that's what I think happened for me when he healed my father wound. When I began to realize he's the dad I could never have here, and he always intended to be that for me, and that I did matter to him, that I was lovable, and I had value. He answered every one of those questions that we're all longing, and I've never turned back.
So what is the role of a father? Why is Satan attacking fathers so heavily in the world? It's almost as if he's trying to destroy the whole concept of father and what a father is supposed to do in people's lives.
You know, there's been a lot of different answers to that. I think, and I learned this from a Pentecostal preacher friend of mine a long time ago. He called me and goes, Rick, is God male or female? And I said, he's a spirit. He goes, so why did he show up as a male? Why not a father? Why not a mother? I'm like, dude, I don't even want to chase that kind of thinking, you know? I accept that he's a father. And here's what he said to me. He said, I'll tell you what I think. I said, what? He goes, because God knew that when sin entered the world, the fathers were the ones who would walk away from their families. The fathers would walk away from their children. He said men commit crime as a gender, women don't. 3 million men in prison, 200,000 women in prison. A man walks away from his wife and kids or abuses them, you think nothing of it. If a woman does it, you think there's a problem. And he said God was going to have to come and make up for the fathers that would fail. Remember, it says, I'm the father to the fatherless. He's not the mother to the motherless. Because why? Moms as a gender don't reject their kids and walk away from them as a group.
As a whole, yeah.
Yeah. The men will, as a group, will do it. And we kind of expect it of them. And so
Why do you think that is?
I don't really know, brother. We could say in the simple sense, sin, you know. There is Adam in the garden. I think men as a group we don't deal with conflict well. And Adam's standing right there next to Eve while she's talking to the serpent. Larry Crabb wrote a book about this called The Silence of Adam.
Oh, Larry Crabb's awesome.
Yeah. I don't know if you read that book, but Crabb points out that, you know, when it says that he was standing there with her, that's Imhot. He was actually standing right there with her, watching her talk to the serpent. And he did nothing. He said nothing. He stayed silent. And when she says, here, bub, eat this, he listened. He obeyed her. And yet we know from Timothy that, you know, Eve was deceived. Adam was not. Adam knew. Men is a gender tend to withdraw from conflict. And if we don't withdraw from it, then we'll control it by being abusive. But it's all fear driven. I think there's something to say about that male ego, you know, that our ego gets it's so at stake that we don't know how to really live a life of humility.
Yeah, and it's not that women don't have egos, it's just that men in their role as protector and this and that, it tends to be greater in them.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I've always said it kind of funny. You're gonna put an M16 in a man's hand and say, go take the hill, he'll do it. You say, all right, now go solve conflict with your wife. Wait a minute. No. Yeah, let me go back to the battlefield. You know.
Well, sadly, we're almost out of time again.
We're more emotionally vulnerable there, right?
We've got to end this again. I'm just so upset that we only have 20 minutes per show. But before we end it, I want you to talk about what can a person do to heal their father wound? What are give me 5 things that in the first thing they should do, second thing they should do, order.
First thing is, and I actually have some notes to myself about that, express your pain. You know, let yourself say it hurts. Let yourself say ouch. Let yourself admit that you have that. It's the first thing you want to do. Admit that you have a pain. All right. And then you're going to have to start learning to love yourself. And the best way to do that is go to the Father. You know, meditate on scripture. Psalm 139 was so helpful to me. How wonderful are your thoughts of me, O Lord. I think negative thoughts about me, but he's thinking wonderful thoughts about me. There's so many, there's many as a sand. And so you're going to have to learn to start loving yourself. You can't love another until you love yourself, right? Husband loves his wife, loves himself. Right. You're going to have to learn to start loving and respecting yourself. And that's why I tell people, you want to love yourself? Go to the cross.
Yes.
That will show you just how valuable you really are. And if he loves you, why can't you? And our love for ourselves isn't an arrogant, prideful love. It's a love that's pure and strong out of humility, because Father has declared us lovable. You see, and then you're going to have to deal with all the effects that wound has had on you. And here's the other part, and on others. So now you have to go ask for forgiveness. You're going to have to heal relationships that can be healed. Because in our father wound, we've hurt others along the way. I hurt my wife. I've hurt some friendships along the way. And and I had to go make some restitution for some things, you know?
Mhm.
And then you allow the Lord, in a sense, to parent you, to become the dad that you never had. And then last thing, the big thing is you got to forgive. I'll just end it there. Forgiveness is crucial, because forgiveness means I'm going to walk in humility.
Yeah.
I'm going to forgive myself, forgive others. Why? Because I'm okay now.
Mm.
And it's okay to not be okay. Why? I'm already lovable. The cross declares that I am. It's a much more powerful way to live when I recognize I am. And here's ultimately saying this: you identify that your identity is not a sinner. You are a son who happens to be a sinner.
Very important.
Very important. And that one shift at the emotional level transforms everything.
Yeah. I love the point you made about going to the cross. A lot of people doubt, they just won't believe that God could love them based on what they went through in life. And one of the things the Father said to me was meditate on the crucifixion. In all four Gospels, read them again and again and again, and do that for weeks to come. Just meditate on those. And then he said, and when the cross becomes enough proof for you that I love you, then you're going to find healing.
Yes. Yes. And this is just me, David. I think sometimes in our Protestant world, not using the corpus as a Christian symbol has done us a disservice.
Mm.
We focus so much on the resurrection, which is what's the hope of the future, but it was the cross that declares we have value, that we're lovable, that he was doing everything to fight for us. That's how much he values us.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there's a power in remembering the cross.
Well, Dr. Richard Marks, my good friend, if people want to follow up and contact you, what are some of the ways they can contact you?
I would tell them to go to relatewell.us, and they can hit the Dr. Rick Marks link, and you'll get the information there.
You have a radio show?
We do. We have a radio show, but it's local to Jacksonville, but it is our podcast as well. And the podcast is known as Relate Well with Dr. Rick Marks. If you want to hear it on the radio, you got to go to 91.7. The Truth. TheTruth.com is a national station. And we're on The Truth every Sunday, 5 to 6.
Eastern.
For an hour, Eastern time. Yeah. And so I have a podcast. And of course, we produce videos, and we're on a YouTube channel. And we actually actively work with couples in high marital stress or broken relationships with singles. We teach people how to have healthy, mature relationships so they can love maturely. The greatest of these is love. Let us learn to love maturely.
And you will go to churches and speak, and you will do conferences?
Yes, we do. We do marriage retreats, relationship seminars, singles retreats. We consult with churches how to develop healthy marriage mentoring ministries, or ministries that increase the level of connection that you can have in your church. We're all about healthy attachments and bonds. And David, I'll say this before I hang up. The leading health crisis in America isn't COVID. That's an urgent crisis. The epidemic crisis in America is loneliness. It is so bad, health insurance companies have hired a company out of Nashville to fix the problem. Why is the church not fixing the issue of loneliness? You'll go to church lonely and they walk out lonely. Loneliness leads to heart disease, heart attacks, strokes, all kinds of abdominal problems. It leads to addictions. It creates depression. It creates anxiety disorders. And the insurance companies pay for all that. That's why they want it fixed.
You know,
it is not good that man should be what? Alone. You can be married and very much alone. And you can be single and not alone. That's about living your relationship to God the Father and others and yourself, the Great Commandment.
I remember reading Conrad Barz's book on affirmation disorder. His daughter, Suzanne, is now continuing his work in Texas. And his conclusion was that in order for affirmation disorder to be fixed, which is kind of what we've been talking about, in terms of what people can do for other people, he said you have to engage in affective affirmation. Yes. You have to be in their presence on a regular basis. They need to see in your eyes complete acceptance, and love. And when they see that in your eyes, they will begin to listen to you.
Yes. From a biological standpoint, it has to affect the right side of the brain, which is the emotional brain. Affect is the emotional part of the brain. It has to tap into emotion.
Well, we've had Rick on, Dr. Marks, for 5 times now, and I guess you know why after listening to this. Rick, it's been great to have you. I'm David Kyle Foster for Pure Passion.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Remember, much of Dr. Foster's teaching has been taken from his new book entitled Sexual Healing Reference Edition, available at our website, masteringlife.org. This podcast and our many other resources are available because of our donors. If you are one of them, thank you. If you would like to join in supporting us, please visit masteringlife.org.